My name is Nathan Brooks, and at 63 years old I finally realized that the people I loved the most had been celebrating the holidays on my kindness, while slowly pushing me farther away from the family I had spent decades holding together. The painful truth crashed into my heart the afternoon I overheard my daughter and her husband laughing with their neighbors about how peaceful every gathering became whenever I stayed quiet in the background, even though every decoration, every meal, and every smiling guest had been paid for with my hard-earned savings. Hearing those words did not fill me with anger, because the feeling that settled inside me was much colder than rage, almost like a door closing forever. After standing open through countless winters of disappointment and silent sacrifice, I drove home without turning on the radio, parked in my empty driveway, and sat behind the steering wheel for nearly an hour while memories from the last 20 years replayed one after another until I could finally see a pattern that had been hiding in plain sight the entire time. Only a week earlier my daughter, Emily, had invited everyone to her spacious suburban home for the annual holiday planning meeting, where she proudly directed relatives through every tiny detail with the confidence of someone convinced the celebration existed because of her leadership alone. She smiled warmly whenever guests looked her way, but when she reached my name on her neatly organized list, she casually told me that my only responsibility was to arrive on time, avoid telling long stories, and simply enjoy myself without making anything uncomfortable for anyone else. Everyone around the dining table chuckled politely, including my son-in-law, Brandon, whose amused grin suggested that I had somehow earned the reputation of being the family embarrassment, even though I could never remember causing any real trouble at previous gatherings. I quietly nodded because arguing had never changed anything, and none of them knew that before sunrise that same morning I had already transferred several $1,000s to reserve the luxury lodge where the entire celebration would take place, just as I had done every single year without expecting recognition. As I drove back to my modest house, a notification from my bank appeared on my phone confirming that another large payment had successfully gone through, and I suddenly realized that nobody had ever asked who actually carried the financial weight behind the holiday traditions they loved so much. That simple realization planted a question in my mind that refused to disappear, because if everyone believed I contributed nothing except awkward moments, then why had I been quietly financing the memories they proudly claimed as their own for so many years? For years, I convinced myself that the uncomfortable moments were simply part of growing older. But looking back, I could finally see how every holiday seemed to follow the exact same script without anyone questioning it. Something minor would go wrong during dinner. Someone would gently blame me in front of the family, and by the following morning I would receive a polite phone call asking if I could cover another unexpected expense to help keep everyone happy, because they knew I would never refuse. The first time it happened, I barely noticed, because it seemed too small to matter. Yet those little moments quietly became traditions of their own without my realizing it. One year the turkey came out overcooked after Emily insisted I follow her instructions, but she laughed in front of everyone and claimed I had ignored her advice, leaving the family convinced I had ruined the meal while I quietly paid for extra catering the next day without defending myself. The following year I shared an old story from my years working as a bridge inspector, hoping my grandchildren would enjoy hearing about the adventures that had filled my younger days with purpose and excitement. Before I reached the ending, Brandon dramatically checked his watch while Emily gently interrupted me with a smile, saying everyone wanted to enjoy dessert before the evening became too long, and the entire table laughed as though I had committed some terrible offense by simply speaking. After enough holidays passed, I stopped trying to remember exactly what I had supposedly done wrong, because the accusations always changed while the outcome remained exactly the same every single December. I would apologize for things I barely understood, write another check without hesitation, and convince myself that keeping the family together mattered more than protecting my own dignity. Even though that belief slowly cost me both my savings and my confidence, the only person who ever seemed uncomfortable with the way I was treated was my younger son, Ryan, whose quiet honesty reminded me so much of his late mother that simply looking at him often filled me with equal amounts of pride and sadness. During one family dinner, he cautiously mentioned that I deserved far more appreciation than anyone gave me, but Emily quickly changed the subject before anyone else could respond, leaving Ryan frustrated while I silently wondered how many years he had been noticing what I refused to see myself. My older sister, Margaret, noticed everything without needing anyone to explain it because she had watched our family grow through both joyful seasons and painful ones, and she understood people better than they understood themselves. During one dinner, she quietly leaned toward me while everyone argued over seating arrangements and softly asked how much longer I planned to accept being treated like a guest in the family I had spent my entire life protecting, leaving me without a single honest answer. After my wife, Linda, passed away nearly 20 years earlier, the silence inside our home became almost unbearable, and I threw myself into keeping every family tradition alive because I believed those celebrations were the last thread connecting us to her memory. Every holiday, dinner, birthday gathering, and anniversary became my personal mission, convincing myself that if I could keep everyone together under one roof, then somehow the family we built together would never truly disappear. A few weeks before that painful planning meeting, I had visited my cardiologist after feeling unusually exhausted, and the tests revealed that constant stress was beginning to take a serious toll on my health. The doctor encouraged me to slow down, avoid unnecessary pressure, and start thinking about my own future instead of carrying everyone else's burdens. But I left his office knowing I had ignored that advice for most of my adult life. That same evening, Emily casually suggested that Brandon might need financial help for an upcoming business investment and hinted that Ryan should consider lending him part of his savings because family should always support one another during difficult times. As I watched my hard-working son grow uncomfortable with the conversation, I realized the pattern had already started reaching beyond me, and if nobody stopped it now, they would eventually drain the generosity of every caring person in the family. When I returned home that night, I opened my laptop and carefully reviewed years of bank statements, invoices, and payment confirmations that had quietly accumulated without anyone else ever noticing them. Every contract for the holiday venue, catering service, decorations, entertainment, floral arrangements, and rental equipment carried only one name as the responsible customer, and seeing my own signature repeated across every document made me understand that the entire celebration depended on someone everyone believed contributed almost nothing. The deeper I searched through those records, the more unbelievable the truth became, because every holiday for nearly 2 decades had been built on automatic payments leaving my account without a single complaint from me. Emily loved receiving compliments for organizing unforgettable celebrations. Brandon proudly accepted praise for creating perfect family memories, and I quietly handled every bill before anyone else even knew one existed. 2 days later, Emily called and asked if I could drop off several folding tables she wanted to borrow for another planning session, and I agreed without giving the request much thought, because saying yes had become second nature to me. When I reached her house, I walked around the side entrance carrying the tables and accidentally stopped when I heard familiar voices drifting from the backyard where several neighbors were enjoying drinks together. Brandon stood confidently beside the grill, telling everyone that he and Emily had perfected the family holiday tradition through years of careful planning, proudly explaining that everything always turned out better whenever older relatives simply stayed out of the way and let younger people handle important decisions. Emily laughed warmly beside him instead of correcting the story, and hearing her silently agree with words that erased everything I had sacrificed over the years broke something inside me that could never be repaired again. I quietly placed the tables beside the fence, without letting anyone know I had arrived, returned to my truck, and drove home, through streets already glowing with colorful holiday lights that suddenly felt strangely empty. For the first time in many years, I did not cry or feel angry because the confusion had finally disappeared, replaced by a calm certainty that I could no longer continue living as someone whose generosity was expected but whose presence was barely tolerated. That evening I sat alone in my kitchen with old financial records spread across the table, carefully calculating how much money I had spent creating celebrations that never truly included me in spirit. Despite my constant support behind the scenes, the final total was large enough to have changed my retirement completely. But what hurt far more than the money was realizing I could not remember a single holiday where I genuinely felt valued as a father instead of being treated like an invisible bank account with a familiar face. I sat in complete silence for a long time before finally reaching a decision that felt both heartbreaking and strangely peaceful, because I understood that arguing with anyone would never repair years of quiet disrespect or make them appreciate sacrifices they had chosen not to see. Instead of planning a dramatic confrontation, I decided that this holiday season I would simply step away, stop paying for everything, and allow everyone to discover what the celebration actually required when someone else had to carry the responsibility. Early the next morning, I called the event lodge where our family had gathered every December for nearly 20 years, and the manager warmly greeted me by name because she recognized me as the person who had always handled every reservation and payment without fail. I politely explained that I wanted to remove myself from all future bookings and asked her to contact my daughter directly if she wished to continue using the venue, leaving the manager surprised that the family organizer she had heard so much about had never actually been the customer on the account. One by one, I contacted every business connected to the celebration, including the bakery, the decorating company, the florist, the equipment rental service, and the catering team that had worked with us for years without ever knowing the full story behind the invoices they mailed each December. I never canceled anyone without warning because I respected every hard-working business owner, and I simply asked each company to transfer future arrangements into Emily's name if she still wanted the same services, making it clear that I was only removing my own financial responsibility rather than creating problems for anyone else. When I finished the last phone call, I leaned back in my chair and felt a sense of relief that I had not experienced in decades, almost as though an invisible weight had finally been lifted from my shoulders after years of carrying it alone. For the first time since losing my wife, I realized that protecting my own peace did not make me selfish, because genuine love should never require a person to sacrifice their dignity just to remain welcome at their own family table. That evening Ryan stopped by after work, still wearing his dusty work clothes, and the moment he looked at my face he quietly admitted that something about me seemed different from any other day he could remember. I told him everything from the conversations I had overheard to the financial records I had uncovered and the calls I had made that morning, and after listening without interrupting, he lowered his head with tears in his eyes before softly saying that he had waited years for me to finally realize I deserved far better than the life I had been settling for.